Today's topic is data types. So, what is a data type, firstly? Like, if any of you have experience with any other languages, you should be good enough to understand. So, anyone quick before we discussed about variables, right? What variables has? Variables hold some data. They actually store some data. Okay. So, what is the kind of data that it will store? Okay, that can be a integer, string, boolean, null, BigInt, symbol, anything. Okay, all these the type of data that it is actually storing. So those different types we call it as a data types. Okay, so nothing but in a simple term you can consider data types are a kind of a value a variable can hold in JavaScript. Okay, so for a particular variable, what kind of data that it can actually store? Okay, that can be string, integer, boolean, anything, right? So those kinds of different variety of data, okay, that we actually call it as a data type. Okay, so mainly why we need this data types? Okay, you have a different variation of situations where you will be using different kinds of data, right? So let's assume if you are creating a new Gmail account or some other account. Okay. So what happens? You actually enter your username or your first name, last name. So all these are like alphabets, which we can consider simply like a string. Okay. But when it comes to your mobile number or your PIN code or something, so what is that? That is kind of an integer value, like numeric value again, right? So these are different types of data that we have and we need to store it. So all those will come under this data types. Okay. So in JavaScript, we have two different type of data types. One is primitive data type and other is non-primitive data types. Okay. So similar to any other programming language, here also we have this primitive data types and non-primitive data types. Okay. Firstly, what is a primitive data type? Okay, so you can consider primitive data types are kind of a very simple data types that can store single value. Okay, just make it, it can store only single value. Okay, it is not like an array which can hold multiple values, or it's not kind of an object which can actually store the references or anything, like not reference, the object of values like multiple arrays like this. Okay, so when you talk about primitive data type, it is like a simple data type that can store a single value directly in the memory. Okay, and also these primitive data types are immutable. Okay, so when you tell about immutable, what is immutable? Anyone has idea? Like in Java also we have something called mutable and immutable, right? Okay, so when you talk about immutable, right, what you tell is the value that you have actually stored, that value cannot be changed once created. Okay, maybe once I show the example, you'll get it more clear. So what I mean to tell is, you have a variable a equal to 10. Okay, you cannot actually change the original value. You cannot change the value of a equal to 10 to a different value. But what you can do is you can tell b equal to a again. So which means that you are creating a new value, sorry, new reference to that, but you are not going to change the value. Okay, once we see the example, you'll get better understanding. Okay, and next, this primitive data types are singular values, so it is actually very fast and compared. When you compare it with the non-primitive data types, accessing of primitive data types are actually very faster. Okay, and next comes this non-primitive data types. So what is this non-primitive data type? Okay, non-primitive data types are nothing but reference data types. Okay, When you tell about reference, what I mean to tell is you have an object, okay, and you want to store the same object into a different object. Okay, so then you can use this non-primitive data types. Or if you want to store complex values, like let's assume array. Okay, you have an array. I want to store that some values in an array. So those are all non-primitive data types. Maybe once we see some example, we'll get better understanding. So if we have Visual Code handy with you guys, you can open it. So first we'll test with primitive data types. Okay. So what I was telling, primitive data types are nothing but the simpler data types. Those are not objects, those are not arrays. So already we have seen many primitive data types. Like simpler data types you can consider. Let simple is equal to primitive value. So this is one primitive data type. Okay. If I want to print it, console.log, I'll tell simple. Okay. So here, if you are storing with some characteristics, right? We call this as a string. Okay. String type. So in the next slide, we'll come about completely what are the different primitive data types that we have, what are non-primitive data types that we have. But just for simple understanding, this is like this. Okay. In the same way, I can consider let simple value equal to some kind of 10. Okay. So here we are considering this one as a integer value. Okay. But when you go to other programming languages like something like Java, what we tell, we'll tell explicitly it is int, or if you want string, we'll tell explicitly it is string. But in JavaScript, you don't need to define the type explicitly. It automatically considers the type based on the value that you are actually using. Okay. So generally what you do in Java or something, you tell like int a equal to something, string b equal to some value, right? But here in JavaScript, you don't need to mention the type of the data that you are actually storing. By assigning the value to a particular variable, it will actually automatically assign, like it will automatically take the data type and it will consider it. Okay. So if I go to this console.log, teacher plus simple value. Okay. So this is how you can actually declare some primitive types like this string primitive value, integer primitive value. Okay. Now, if I want to know what is the type of simple, like, yes, we have stored some value, but whether it is actually considered it as string, we want to know it. How we can know is you can just type console.log type of simple. Okay. So you have some keyword, something called type of. Okay. It will tell you what is the type of this. See, if you take this one, what it is telling? It is telling like string. I was telling you, right? It will automatically consider the type of the variable based on the value that you are actually passing it. So when I give something like type of as the variable, type of this particular variable name, it will tell you on which type it is actually considering. In the similar way, if you see for console.log type of simple value. Okay. So as per R, it is like an integer, right? Just run it again. Like, sorry, this number. So here, when you talk about integer, it considered as a number. Okay. So like this, you don't need to explicitly mention the type of a variable. Okay. So coming back to our primitive type, I was telling that we cannot reassign the value. Okay. I can tell like simple equal to primitive genius, or simple b equal to simple. I'll give you few examples and I can tell you. Sol.log simple. Yeah. So if I just print it out, see here what we have done it. Can someone tell what we have done here in this particular two lines? Okay, correct. So here what it happens is, firstly, what is the value that you have in line number 15 for simple? It is primitive value, correct?
Okay, okay.
And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, okay. And
So,
again, what
hmm,
we have done, yeah, sorry, tell me. Yeah,
we are not declaring the variable, uh, but we are printing directly, right?
yeah, correct, correct. So here I'll tell you one more thing. Okay, what happens is here we are telling in primitive data type we cannot change the value, correct?
Okay,
If you remember,
okay.
I was telling you we cannot
Hmm.
change the value. So why? Because primitive types are immutable. Okay. So here in line number 21, what we have done is I have assigned some other value for simple equal to primitive changes. In this case, what do you think? Primitive value will be changed with primitive changes? It is not changing primitive value to primitive changes. A new reference for simple with primitive changes. Okay. It will not replace primitive value this way. No? It will instead, it will create a new memory with primitive changes. Okay. So it means like simple will stop referring to primitive value. It will refer to primitive changes. So it is like it will refer to the new value rather than the old value. Okay. And next, what you have done here is for simple b equal to simple. We have done this here, right? So what will happen here? So here, what happens is this simple b also will directly look for this primitive changes. Okay. It will, what it is doing, it is just referring to this particular value of primitive changes.
Hmm.
Okay. So that we are calling it as a reference, which is like a non-primitive type. Okay. So that's a thing. Okay. So, and for primitive types and non-primitive types, there are some memories. Okay. Primitive types will be stored in one memory and non-primitive types will be stored in a different memory. What are those memories? So firstly, when you're learning any programming language, right, you need to understand the memories also. Okay. So what are those memories? One is stack memory and one is heap memory. So I'll go to that slide. So what is this? Primitive types will be stored in stack memory, and non-primitive types will be stored in heap memory. Okay. So primitive types and function calls local variables. So when you talk about local variables, within scoped variables, like yesterday we have seen, right? We have this if condition or for loop. So even those also will be stored in stack memory. Okay. And what is this stack memory? Is it faster or slower? Considering we are telling like primitive types are actually very faster, right? Considering that, uh, so stack memory will be fast or very slow. So these stack memory is actually pretty faster, and also this is automatically managed. Okay. So what is this automatically managed is? So let's assume I have a variable which is with let a equal to 10. Once that scope has been done, it automatically clears that particular data. Okay. I have defined a variable within one scope. Okay. Once I came out of the scope, I don't need that variable anymore, right? So that will automatically clear the memory from the stack. Okay. And also in stack memory, the value is stored directly, not the reference. Okay. When I talk about value, let's say let a equal to 10 or let b equal to some value. Let's say Hyderabad. Okay. Here, what it will store is 10 and Hyderabad in the stack memories. Okay. As those are the values. Okay. So mainly stack memory is very faster. It stores only primitive data types and local variables, and it is automatically managed, and it actually stores the direct values. Okay. So what is heap memory then? Okay. So similar to non-primitive data types, yes. So this non-primitive data types, everything will be stored in heap memory. Okay. You can consider this as a larger memory area. Okay. And as this will have all the references. Okay. So non-primitive data types, like they will have mostly the references, right? So in heap memory, the references will be stored for the non-primitive data types, and also it actually stores all your complex and dynamic data. Okay. So in stack memory, you will actually store the actual value, but here you will not store the actual values in the variables or any of the reference in any of the reference, or wherever you are having the values, it will not store it. It will just store the references of it. Okay. So we can just see one simple example to understand this. So here, let's declare some simple. Sorry, I think simple we have already seen, right? This is a, you can consider this as a stack. Okay, we'll use for stack memory, which is a primitive data type. And here we are using 10 directly. So 10 will be stored in the stack memory. Okay. Now, for non-primitive data type, let's take a simple one more example of object. Okay. So how you can declare an object is you have to put it in a flower braces and write it. So see, right now what am I am showing? Everything will be discussed again later. This is just for understanding this particular concept. Okay. So for creating an object, we'll declare some variable name as obj1. Okay. And I'll put equal to. So for primitive types, you can consider like if you are storing string, just single quotes and then value, or numerics, you can just put 10, something like that. But here, when you're storing any object, you have to put something in flower braces. Okay. So this will be considered as an object. So now I want to have an object. In an object, we have something called key value. Okay. I can put something like name equal to something like playwright. Okay. I want to store this object. So here I will write something called obj2 equal to obj1. Yeah. So considering what we have discussed here before, can you tell what will be stored in which memory? So this obj2, this will store it in the heap memory, because what we are telling? We are telling the reference type will be stored in heap, right? So here
Means
obj2
the
refers
obj1
to,
will be stored under heap memory.
yes, yes. So that's also an object, right? So that also will be stored under the heap memory. Okay, it's not a simple primitive type. It is a object, right? So objects, arrays, all these complex data types will be stored in heap memory. So obj1 and obj2, so those will store in the heap memory. Okay, but what it will do is obj2 will point to object of obj1. Okay, so the reference will be the same, but these two have a individual memories. Obj1, obj2 and obj1, they have individual memories, but obj1 2, this will actually point to obj1. Okay, so both will have the same reference but with different allocations, where obj2 will be pointing it to obj1 reference. Okay, so any doubts here? Okay, okay. So even if you take arrays also, right, it will be the same concept. But before just going to these data types, you need to be aware of this. So that's the reason I was actually telling you about this memories. Okay, so now let's go to our data types, primitive data types. Okay, let's come back to here. So before going to these data types, we discussed on the memories, right? So considering that primitive data types will be stored in stack memory. Okay,
Yes.
yeah. So here in primitive data types in JavaScript, there are these many number of primitive types. One is string, number, boolean, undefined, null, BigInt, symbol. Okay, so let's discuss all this today. Okay, is an alphanumeric. Okay, so let's say you have your Gmail account, something like abc123 at gmail.com. You can store it. Or you have your course name, something like Playwright, that you can. Or if you want to declare something like a mix of all these characters, like numerics and integers, both you can add it in a string. So you can consider like a simple mixed alphanumeric values. Okay, all those you will be able to store it in a string. Okay, next is the number. So what is number? This will also be a number in JavaScript, but the thing is, right, it can store the normal integer values. When we consider integer values, generally we have a perception like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, right? Yes, it can store that. Or even it can store the float or the decimal values that we tell, like 10.5 or 1.2, any kind of decimal values. Even that also it can store it. But when you take something like type of this variable name, it will show you like number itself. Okay, it will not show you like whether it's an integer or a float or a decimal. It will show you still like a number. And next comes this boolean. So what is this boolean? So considering like similar other any other programming language, right, boolean is same here also. Okay, it will store only true or false. Okay, if you have a condition, I want to tell like uh, in your test case you have a validation. Let's say you are creating a Gmail account. Now I want to check whether this is created or not. If it is created, I want to update it like true. If it is not created, I want to update it like false. So in those conditions we can use these booleans stating true or false. So, and next comes this undefined. You don't want to assign any value to it. Okay, if you don't want to assign any value to it, then you can actually feel like undefined. Okay, so where we actually use it,
Yeah.
that's the main question, right? Why
Correct.
do
Correct.
we actually need this undefined?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's assume uh, you have something like an mm, 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 mm. let me put it in a way. Let's assume I have an API. Okay,
Mm.
and in that particular API I am populating something called my age, let's assume. Okay, but that API is not actually returning me any value for that age. Okay, so in those case what we do is if something is not returned, it will be empty. Okay, so the value will not be there. In those cases I want to do a validation like if my age is undefined, I want to put some message like my age is not provided. Okay, so uh, you got the thing, right? I have an API, or somewhere I declared something like my age equal to this one, but in one condition I have not defined my age at all. In that cases I want to do a validation like if my age is undefined, I want to perform some other action. So in those kinds of situation we will use this undefined. Okay, and next comes this null. So what is null? Like in any other programming language, this is also same. Okay, so let's assume I have a variable. Okay, I will tell explicitly like this value is null. But when you talk about undefined, it means like you have not assigned any value to it at all. But for this one, you will assign a value which is something called null. Okay, so let's assume uh, I have a value something like name equal to playwright. Okay, now after doing some operations, I want to explicitly make sure like this value should be cleared and updated it with null. In those cases, I can tell like name equal to null. Okay, and uh, suppose let's assume we have the databases also, right? Even in databases also, I want to tell like if I am not getting any data for a particular column. Okay, that column might be the same name or some other string or any other variable. Okay, for those values, if I am not getting anything, I want to update that column name as null. In those conditions also, I'll update it as null. So null is something that we explicitly assign it, but when it's undefined, you will not assign any value to it. Okay, any doubts here? Maybe these two look similar, but they are not similar. Undefined is something you are not assigning any value, but null is something you are assigning, but with a value of null. That's all. Okay. And next comes the big int. So what is this big int? By this name, what you understand? If you want to store some large numeric values, Okay, then you can actually use this BigInt. Definitely, I don't think for our testing purpose, mostly will not use something like BigInt, but just for your knowledge, like what are the different types that we have. Yeah, so this is also one of the type. Okay, see, it will feel like both number and BigInt are same. Yes, these both are same, but the size of it is actually varies. So whenever you want to store some huge number of values, like a larger amount of data set, then you can actually use this BigInt. Okay, and next is the symbol. So what is symbol? I'm definitely sure if you're not aware of JavaScript, this you might not hear any time before. So this is something, it is it tells like if you want to store some unique values. When you talk about unique values, let's assume you have your employee ID, right? So for each and every employee, you will have your individual employee ID. Or if you take an bank account number, so that is also an unique bank account number, right? If I want to store something like unique, okay, if I want to store some value with something like unique, then we actually go with symbols. Okay, so for every variable that you declare, if you declare something like symbol of something, then it will tell you like it is an unique value. Okay, so with this, on the conceptual side, primitive data types, these are the primitive data types that we actually have. And if you have any questions, we can discuss. Else, we can go to implementation, how we can declare each one of this. Any doubts so far on this? Yeah. Okay. If no doubts, then let's go to the topic. Till now, how many data types that we have used? Till now, here, uh, let string type. I'll mention something like this. String value. So this is a string type. I will mention that number type. I'll mention something like 100. Okay. Let Boolean type. So Boolean, what it stores?
True or false?
Yeah, correct. So I can just mention true or false. That's all. Okay. Next, let undefined type. So what we are telling undefined will not assign any value. So it will be like this. This is just a declaration. So next, let null type. So what we are telling this is a null value that we will assign explicitly. Okay. Next, let BigInt type. So in BigInt, what we are telling, we can store much more complex, right? So I'll just put it like this. Next, symbol. So for symbol, I'll give some example like this. For symbol, you have to write something called this symbol interface. Inside that, you need to mention your variable name. So let's keep the same thing. So I am telling I have a symbol type, something like this. So this is the way of declaring a symbol. Okay. Now let's print all this. Console dot log. Or else we'll use this one. Okay. Type of this so that you will know what is this, right? Yeah. Okay. So what we have done here, we have declared all our variables, sorry, all our data types, and then we are trying to print what is the type of that. Okay. Let's, if I go here, yes. If you see here, you will see everything. Yeah. Okay. First one is the string type. Okay. This is a string, and next is the number. This is the number. Next is the boolean. Yes. And next is an undefined. Next is an object. Yes. Null is an object. And then, yeah, this one again it return number. Okay. And this is a symbol. So any doubts here? So what we have done is we have declared all our uh, variables first, like the string type, number type, boolean type, undefined null, BigInt, all these things. And what we have done is we have written some statements, which is like type of. What we are doing out here is by using this type of, we are just identifying whatever the value that we stored, is it what the data type that we are actually expecting or not. That is the main thing. Okay, so here I stored some string value, but whether it is considering it as string or not, how I'll know? If I mention this type of, it will tell me whether it is string or not. In the similar way, I mentioned number type as 100. Whether this is considering it as a number or not, how I will know it? So if I mention type of, it will tell you. So that's why I just put some print statements with type of. Okay, but if you see this output, is this output clear or correct? Why we are telling this as in big int type, right? But why it is showing as number? It is considered as number. But when you have a big int, if you want to explicitly tell like this is a big int, you can specify something like this. N.
Oh,
Okay. Then you will see this like a big int. You see now?
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now you'll be able to see it as like a big int.
Actually, n is considered as
So what happens is when you put something like n, it will convert the number into a big integer.
okay, okay.
So like this, we'll declare all our data types. Okay. So with this, I want to close the session for today. If you have any doubts, yes, definitely we can